For many men over 50, the idea of starting or maintaining a romantic relationship feels fundamentally different from what it once was. Years of emotional investment, compromise, and personal sacrifice often leave a residue of fatigue that is not easily shaken. This exhaustion is not always dramatic or bitter. More often, it is quiet and reflective, shaped by past marriages, divorces, long-term partnerships, or repeated disappointments that have slowly reshaped expectations about love. Emotional fatigue can come from having spent decades prioritizing others over oneself. Many men in this stage of life recall years focused on providing, protecting, and stabilizing families, sometimes at the expense of their own emotional needs. When relationships ended or failed to meet deeper emotional expectations, the result was not only heartbreak but a questioning of whether the effort required for intimacy is still worth the cost. There is also the weight of unresolved emotional history. Past conflicts, betrayals, or unmet needs do not simply disappear with time. They linger and influence present decisions. For some men, the thought of reopening emotional doors feels risky, as if it could awaken pain they have learned to manage by keeping relationships at a distance. Another factor is the shift in emotional awareness that often comes with age. Men over 50 are frequently more self-aware than they were in their youth. They understand their limitations, patterns, and vulnerabilities more clearly. This clarity, while healthy, can also make them more cautious, leading to the belief that avoiding relationships is safer than navigating emotional complexity again. Cultural expectations play a role as well. Many men were raised in environments where emotional expression was discouraged, and strength was defined by independence. As they age, this conditioning can clash with modern relationship dynamics that emphasize emotional openness, vulnerability, and communication. Rather than adapt, some men choose withdrawal. There is also a subtle fear of emotional dependence. After rebuilding a sense of autonomy post-divorce or after a major relationship ends, the idea of becoming emotionally entangled again can feel like a loss of hard-earned independence. Solitude becomes associated with peace rather than loneliness. For some, emotional fatigue is mistaken for contentment. They may genuinely enjoy their routines, friendships, and personal freedom, interpreting the absence of romantic involvement as fulfillment rather than avoidance. This perspective is not necessarily unhealthy, but it complicates the narrative around whether they are giving up or simply choosing differently. Loss also shapes emotional withdrawal. The death of a long-term partner can fundamentally alter a man's relationship with intimacy. Grief may not manifest as visible sadness but as a quiet refusal to imagine loving someone else, either out of loyalty or fear of experiencing loss again. Additionally, emotional energy is no longer infinite. Men over 50 often become more selective about where they invest their time and feelings. If relationships are perceived as demanding more than they give, disengagement becomes a rational choice rather than an emotional failure. Ultimately, emotional fatigue does not mean an absence of desire for connection. It often reflects a deep longing for something meaningful combined with uncertainty about whether such depth is still possible or safe to pursue. As men age, their understanding of love often evolves in ways that diverge from traditional romantic ideals. The dramatic, all-consuming love of youth gives way to a more measured and realistic view, shaped by experience rather than fantasy. This shift can make relationships feel less exciting but also more honest. Many men over 50 no longer see relationships as a central pillar of identity. Earlier in life, partnership may have been closely tied to social status, masculinity, or personal success. With age, these external validations lose importance, and the motivation to seek a relationship weakens accordingly. There is also a growing awareness of incompatibility patterns. Men become more attuned to the traits that previously caused conflict, such as mismatched values, communication styles, or life goals. This awareness can make dating feel discouraging, as potential partners are filtered through a more critical and experienced lens. Modern dating culture presents additional challenges. Dating apps, shifting social norms, and ambiguous relationship expectations can feel alienating to men who formed their views on love in a very different era. The rules appear unclear, and the emotional labor required to navigate them feels disproportionate to the potential reward. Some men reassess what partnership truly means to them. Rather than seeking companionship at all costs, they prioritize emotional compatibility, peace, and mutual respect. If these elements seem unlikely, opting out feels like a form of self-respect rather than resignation. There is also the reality of emotional self-sufficiency. Over time, many men develop fulfilling lives that include friendships, hobbies, professional engagement, and family relationships. Romantic love becomes optional rather than essential, altering the urgency to pursue it. Health and aging influence perceptions of partnership as well. Concerns about physical decline, illness, or becoming a burden can make men hesitant to involve someone else in their future. Love becomes entangled with vulnerability in ways that feel uncomfortable or unfair. Financial independence also reshapes priorities. Men who have rebuilt stability after divorce or career transitions may be protective of their resources. The fear of financial entanglement or loss can quietly undermine the desire for commitment. Some men simply redefine love altogether. Instead of romantic partnership, they invest emotionally in friendships, mentorship, or creative pursuits. These connections offer intimacy without the complexities of traditional relationships. In this context, giving up on relationships is not always an act of defeat. It can be a conscious reframing of what love looks like and where emotional fulfillment is found. The question of whether men over 50 are giving up on relationships cannot be separated from the experience of loneliness, which becomes more complex and less visible with age. Unlike the loneliness of youth, which is often loud and urgent, loneliness later in life tends to be quieter, normalized, and sometimes disguised as independence. Many men do not openly acknowledge it, even to themselves, because they have learned to equate emotional self-reliance with strength. As social circles shrink over time, opportunities for meaningful connection naturally decline. Retirement, career changes, relocation, and the loss of long-standing friendships gradually reduce daily human interaction. For men who relied heavily on work or marriage as their primary social anchors, this transition can feel disorienting, leaving a relational void that is difficult to fill. At the same time, solitude is not always experienced as a problem. Many men over 50 report a genuine sense of peace in living alone, setting their own routines and managing their time without negotiation. After years of compromise, solitude can feel restorative, offering emotional quiet and personal control that relationships once disrupted. The challenge arises when chosen solitude slowly transforms into emotional isolation. Without regular emotional exchange, even content men may begin to feel disconnected from others in subtle ways. Conversations become more practical than personal, and emotional depth fades from daily life, creating a quiet longing that is hard to articulate. Fear plays a significant role in maintaining this distance. For men who have experienced painful breakups, betrayal, or profound loss, the idea of opening up again can feel like inviting unnecessary risk. Emotional vulnerability becomes associated with instability, making avoidance seem like a rational form of self-protection. Mental health factors further complicate this dynamic. Depression, unresolved grief, and chronic stress often present as apathy toward relationships rather than obvious emotional distress. Men may interpret this numbness as a natural consequence of aging, unaware that emotional disengagement is not an inevitable part of growing older. Another barrier is the lack of social permission for older men to express emotional need. Cultural narratives often frame later life fulfillment around self-sufficiency rather than connection. As a result, men may feel embarrassed or weak admitting that they desire companionship, intimacy, or emotional closeness. Dating later in life introduces its own psychological pressures. Men over 50 frequently report anxiety around physical aging, sexual performance, and perceived desirability. The fear of rejection feels heavier, not because rejection is new, but because it now feels like a judgment on one's entire life history rather than a single moment. Modern dating environments can intensify this discomfort. Online platforms often prioritize speed, appearance, and constant choice, which can feel dehumanizing or overwhelming. For men unfamiliar or uncomfortable with these systems, disengaging entirely can seem easier than adapting. Yet, many men still hold a quiet hope for connection, even if they claim otherwise. This hope is rarely about recreating youthful romance. Instead, it centers on being understood, respected, and emotionally safe with another person. The desire does not disappear, it simply becomes more selective and cautious. Some men begin to explore alternative forms of intimacy. Deep friendships, community involvement, mentoring relationships, and shared creative pursuits can provide emotional nourishment without the pressure of traditional romantic roles. These connections challenge the assumption that intimacy must always be romantic. There is also a growing recognition that relationships in later life do not need to follow conventional models. Companionship without cohabitation, long-term partnerships without marriage, or emotionally intimate but independent relationships are increasingly appealing to men who value autonomy. Loss continues to shape future choices. Men who have lost partners to illness or death often carry a deep emotional imprint that influences how they approach new relationships. Love becomes intertwined with grief, and the fear of repeating loss can quietly limit openness to new connection. Despite these challenges, many men do form meaningful relationships later in life. These connections tend to be grounded in honesty rather than idealization, and in acceptance rather than expectation. When they happen, they often feel calmer, deeper, and more authentic than earlier relationships. The future of connection for men over 50 may depend on shifting social narratives. Encouraging emotional expression, redefining masculinity, and normalizing vulnerability at every age could open new pathways for connection that feels safe and attainable. Ultimately, the question is not whether men over 50 are giving up on relationships, but whether society is offering them relationship models that honor their experiences, fears, and evolving emotional needs. Connection remains possible, but it often requires new language, new structures, and a deeper understanding of what intimacy truly means at this stage of life.